Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 568. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. I was doing some traveling this week, so I missed the middle of the week show. I plan to do a show today and then another show on Friday to make up for it. Today, we're going to cover non-Gaza stuff, war in Ukraine, war going on in the Middle East, potential Iranian retaliation for the Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate building in Syria. So a lot of important stuff on today's show, and then Friday we'll get into all the news about Gaza. Be sure to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. And follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. I'm now approaching 5,000 followers, so if you don't already follow me on Twitter, head on over and do that and help me hit that number. All right, let's get going here. First article today, Orwellian Tactics, Libertarian Party fears targeting by FBI after letter. So the Libertarian Party has questions for the Department of Justice after the FBI claimed that a foreign threat had access to its Facebook account. A preliminary analysis by the Libertarian Party was hindered by Meta, which offered little clarity on the incident. In a statement published on Friday, the LP chair, Angela McConnell, shared a letter the party received from the Bureau warning of the alleged breach. The FBI maintains active investigations that seek to identify the activities of hostile foreign governments and their intelligence services to target the U.S. government, private sector, and political processes. The letter says the FBI recently obtained information showing that one of these foreign threat actors was in control of various IP addresses that the group used to log onto Facebook account controlled by your organization. The group accessed the account sometime between August 2023 and February 2024. One LP employee with knowledge of the letter told the Libertarian Institute that roughly 10 people have access to the Facebook account. The party has not changed access to the pages within the last 2 months. And that employee did provide a little bit of clarity on, I just asked, was there anybody who within a month, either way of that August date or the February date, that you added or removed from the account and then are added around the August date and then removed around the February date? And the employee said that was not the case. The employee said the LP was unable to access the user archive for its Facebook account to determine if it had been hacked, and so far received no assistance from Meta in resolving the issue. The organization plans to do what it can to learn more about the supposed foreign threat actor and the FBI and why the FBI was surveilling the account in the first place. That source, explained to me that there was a call placed to Meta that I did not include when I published this article because the employee I spoke with seemed very unsure about the significance of that call and if the call was made to the appropriate place. And I'm only mentioning it now because the secretary of the LP, Carol Ann Harlos, did bring it up and I believe play it on her podcast or episode of her show that she put out on this issue. So I just want to say that that particular part of this seems a little dubious to me. So while the source acknowledged that the letter could be the result of good police work, the party is concerned that the move could amount to a veiled threat from foreign agents. And so I want to talk about that, a little bit here. Accounts do get hacked. There may be foreign governments that assess certain LP candidates have a better chance or would skew the election in one way or the other and may be interested to try to get more information about the Libertarian Party. I'm not sure what information they would have thought they would have gotten from hacking the Facebook account. That's why I don't necessarily buy into that proposal. And the employee I spoke with was also very skeptical that this was the case. I did just want to mention it though, because it could be that, there was some nefarious situation going on where, let's say, Russia, North Korea, Cuba, something like that, had tried to, or, was hacking some running some kind of nefarious hacking scheme, right? And they obtained, a list of activity that those parties were involved in. And from that, they were able to kind of trace back and realize that, one of those targets was the Libertarian Party. And the Libertarian Party, along with, 20 other organizations that were targeted, all received the same style letter. Again, that scenario isn't impossible. That's why I included that part in my article. However, there is reason to be concerned. So the worries for the LP are significantly heightened as 2 members of the party's leadership have been contacted by the FBI within the past year. McConnell expressed similar fears in her statement. "We do not trust the FBI. Stories of aggressive FBI field agents have been popping up all over the country. The Biden administration seems to be cracking down on dissenting voices in preparation for the general election." McConnell's statement continued, "We will continue to dissent, and we will call out the corruption of the current Department of Justice and the Biden administration. The greatest threat to the freedom in the United States is an anonymous, hostile foreign government, is the United States government, is the current administration, who has engaged in an unprecedented amount of censorship, coercion, and Orwellian-controlled tactics." The letter to the Libertarian Party came after multiple pro-Palestinian activists received visits from the FBI interested in their social media posts. Rights groups Group Palestine Legal said that the House calls amounted to an effective intimidation and censor activists as the U.S. heads towards election, which libertarian voters and supporters of Palestine could play a crucial role. More than 100,000 Democrats in Michigan voted uncommitted in last month's primary to protest U.S. support for Israel, while the LP presidential hopeful Joe Jorgensen received more votes than the margin between Donald Trump and Joe Biden during the 2020 general election. And so, either of these 2 groups could play a pretty important role here, and it's not impossible, and I think it's more likely than not that the purpose of that letter is intimidation, not just merely, the result of good police work or something like that. All right, next up here, Mitch McConnell says he'll stay in the Senate to fight the isolationist movement. So this is McConnell. He's the current majority leader or minority leader of the Senate. He's a Republican from Kentucky, and he says at the end of the year he's going to step down as the majority leader. He's 82 years old. Minority leader, but he does plan to hold on to his seat until his term ends in 2026, I guess, at which time he'll be 84. McConnell said, "I'm particularly involved in actually fighting back against the isolationist movement in my own party, and some in the other as well. And as the symbol of that lately is, we are going to help Ukraine or not. I've got this sort of on my mind for the next couple of years as something I'm going to focus on." And so, McConnell, he's poor people from Kentucky. This is supposed to be your representative. He's not so concerned about you and what you may think. He is concerned about what's happening in Russia or in Ukraine, and making sure that we send another $60 billion at least in weapons to the Ukrainian government. Another problem here is just smearing people as isolationists because they don't want to support Ukraine, when, in reality, the true isolationists are the people that want empire, who, they want to wage war where they want to place sanctions on who they want, and constantly break off ties between the U.S. and other countries because of their own geopolitical aims and aspirations, where the people who are often smeared as isolationists just don't want war, right? They want to bring the American troops home, but they want Americans to go abroad and to trade and to do business all over the place. Certainly not isolationists. All right, next up here, let's get into some news on the war in Ukraine. Ukraine aid vote not expected in the House for weeks or longer. So House Speaker Mike Johnson said over the weekend, and I had covered this article at antiwar.com, that he would move forward with Ukraine aid right away when Congress returned from Easter break. But now Bloomberg has reported on Wednesday that that vote likely won't happen until mid-April or later due to divisions among Republicans. And so today is April 4th. Mid-April would be a week or two away or later, could, mean May or something like that. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican from Georgia, doubled down on her threat to force a vote to oust Johnson as Speaker if he moves aid forward, and it takes just one member of Congress to set the process in motion. Greene said, "Let me tell you, when he forces that vote again under suspension of with no amendments and funds for Ukraine, and people find out how angry their constituents are about it, that's going to move the needle even more." Other Republicans are looking for Johnson to get concessions from Biden for pushing through the $95 billion aid bill that includes $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel, and a few billion for Taiwan. In an interview on Sunday, Johnson said he was considering other options to arm Ukraine and expressed support for using frozen Russian central bank funds, which would mark a significant escalation in the U.S. economic campaign against Moscow. A bipartisan bill to give the State Department the power to transfer Russian funds to Ukraine, known as the Repo Act, has strong support in Congress and this could potentially move that forward. Democrats are looking to bypass Johnson and force a vote on the foreign military aid bill through a discharge petition, which requires 218 signatures. So far, 192 signatures as a group of 22 progressive Democrats are not signing on due to opposition to arming Israel to support the slaughter in Gaza, and only one Republican has added his signature. Antiwar.com contributor John B. Walsh has been urging Americans to contact their representatives about the discharge petition. He wrote on April 1st, the task for anti-war activists is straightforward. Contact your representative in the House. Here's a list of their phone numbers and email addresses. If they have not signed on to the discharge petition, congratulate them on their anti-war stance, express your support, and urge them to stick to the petition. If they have signed on, urge them to remove their signature. Removing one signature can be done at any time before the 218 signature majority is reached. A list of signatures as of March 22nd before the 2-week Easter recess could be found. Dave has a link in his article here. So again, especially if you have a Democratic representative, I would give them a call and urge them one way or the other. Hopefully this isn't going to work out, but we're talking about a very, very slim number, just 22 or so, 25 members of Congress. A small group of Republicans could sign on to it very quickly and upend this whole thing. So we have to remain aware. And while that Bloomberg piece is reporting that it could be a while before those funds actually are, before the House brings this to a vote, I am concerned that they're going to try to do something in the middle of the night and very quickly. No amendments or anything like that. Just there's going to be a brief debate about it where, everybody just goes and says what they already think. Nobody's actually going to change their minds. And then they're going to vote for this. And so I think once Congress returns, the House returns to session next week, we have to be constantly aware of this. All right, so as I mentioned in that last article that Dave had wrote, Speaker Johnson says he'll support giving frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. This is a major, major step forward and would create a lot of problems if the U.S. ever wants to end the war in Ukraine and try to normalize relations with Russia whatsoever, because then the Russians are going to feel like they're owed all this money. And they're going to demand it back as the process of normalization. And the U.S. isn't going to give them that money. If you remember how controversial it was, I think it was a few $100 million. It might have been in the single-digit billions that Obama freed up for the Iranians that were frozen Iranian funds, right? They were never spent by the U.S. They were just sitting in a bank account over years and years and years. And when Obama finally allowed Iran to access some of those funds as a part of the Iran nuclear deal, it was presented as, oh, we're giving the Iranians money, we're paying them money, when that was never the case. But that was the way it was presented to the American people. That's politics in the U.S. So if they start to move forward with this, it's something that could really knot up and make the U.S.-Russian relationship ever becoming normal, decades more off into the future. All right, next up here, NATO chief floats establishing a $100 billion fund for Ukraine. And so this seems like a way to do a complete end run around what's happening in the U.S. and Congress. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg will propose establishing a $100 billion 5-year fund for Ukraine when the alliance's foreign ministers meet on Wednesday, multiple media outlets reported on Tuesday. The idea is to lock in long-term support for Ukraine amid uncertainty around the U.S. aid to Ukraine, as the $60 billion President Biden is seeking for the proxy war still hasn't been authorized by Congress. The plan is meant to prevent any future U.S. president from withdrawing support from Ukraine. The Financial Times described it as a Trump-proofing the proxy war, as the former president has expressed opposition to the conflict, although he recently floated the idea of providing Ukraine with loans. Politico reported that one idea would involve the 32-member alliance contributing to the $100 billion fund at the same rate they contribute to the alliance's budget. That would put most of the burden on the U.S. since Washington pays for about 2/3 of the NATO budget. So that would be $66 billion that the U.S. would contribute to it. The U.S. and its allies are also considering shifting control of a U.S.-led coalition that coordinates arms shipments to Ukraine, known as the Ukraine Defense Contract Group, to NATO. U.S. officials said the proposal of doing this is so to ensure weapons continue to flow to Ukraine during the second Trump term. The report said that Stoltenberg is hoping to get the plans worked out before NATO leaders hold a summit in Washington this July, but it could face resistance from members who oppose the proxy war, such as Hungary and Slovakia. So a NATO diplomat told the Financial Times, this will be crossing a Rubicon. NATO will have a role in coordinating lethal support to Ukraine. I see consensus emerging, and I think it will be there by the time we get on the plane to Washington. So this is really concerning and is really severs a lot of the sovereignty of America and Americans say in what happens as far as our billions of dollars in weapons going to supporting Ukraine. All right, next up here, Joint Chiefs Chairman claims giving Ukraine long-range ATACMS is no longer as risky. So Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that's General Charles Q. Brown, has claimed arming Ukraine with long-range Army Tactical Missile Systems, or ATACMS, isn't as risky now as it was earlier in the war. Now, the only reason I think this may be moderately true is because some NATO countries have already started to provide some fairly long-range missiles to Ukraine, and so these probably aren't going to be that unique of a threat to Russia as these other longer range cruise missiles are. I think some have a range of 150 to 250 miles, where these ATACMS have a 190 mile range. Now there were several concerns and maybe other barriers to the U.S. sending these to Ukraine. One, of course, is the funding issue, although the Biden administration has proven that they're just willing to kind of ignore the budgetary constraints and send Ukraine some shipments, weapon shipments, $300 million twice now, that they really didn't have the funds approved to do anyways. So I don't think this is necessarily a barrier. The budget is necessarily going to be an ultimate barrier to the U.S. sending ATACMS to Ukraine. But the more major one that I was thinking was the production issue. And apparently this was the reason that the White House has not sent these ATACMS to Ukraine yet, and that is we just don't have enough of them for ourselves, and so we're not in a position to send them to Ukraine. Another possibility is if we do send them to Ukraine, it will be similar to how we sent some other longer or more medium range rockets to Ukraine in the past. I think they had a range of like 100 miles or so, and we sent them less advanced cluster variants, which were less effective and probably less problematic in the view of Russia. But also we only sent about 20 of them, which again are going to make far less of an impact and probably be seen as somewhat less provocative by the Russians. All right, next up here, this is big news. Ukrainian military officers say front lines are at risk of collapsing. High-ranking Ukrainian military officers have told Politico that the front lines in Ukraine are at risk of collapsing and that there are no weapons the West could provide to help the situation. So the officers who served the former commander-in-chief, Des Lushny, said Ukrainian lines could collapse whenever Russia decides to focus its offensive. Russian forces have been making steady gains in eastern Ukraine ever since taking the city of Avdiivka a few weeks ago. There's nothing that can help the Ukrainians now because there are no serious technologies able to compensate Ukraine for the large mass of troops Russia is likely to hurl at us. We don't have those technologies, and the West doesn't have them as well in sufficient numbers, the officer said. Another officer said that Western weapons were quickly becoming ineffective because once Russia learns how to counter them, weapon systems become redundant very quickly because we're quickly countered by the Russians. For example, we use Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles supplied by Britain and France successfully for just a short time. The Russians are always studying. They don't give us a second chance. They're very successful in this. As Ukraine has been losing on the battlefield, its intelligence services have been increasing attacks inside of Russia, which risk a significant escalation since Russia views them as NATO-supported operations. Officials in Ukraine's military intelligence agency, known as the GRU, threatened in comments in The Guardian that they will plan another attack on the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea to the Russian mainland and has been attacked by Ukraine twice before. We will do it in the first half of 2024, the GRU official said, referring to the attack on the Kerch Bridge. The GRU is strongly backed by the CIA, which has been funding and training Ukrainian intelligence agencies since 2014 coup in Ukraine. According to the report from the Washington Post, the second attack on the Kerch Bridge used sea drones, which were specifically developed as a part of a top-secret operation involving the CIA and Western intelligence services. All right, last Ukraine war story for today. Zelensky signs law lowering conscription age to 25. So Ukrainian President Zelensky signed a bill into law on Tuesday that lowers the age of eligible conscripts for mobilization from 27 to 25. The bill was passed by the Ukrainian parliament last May, but has been sitting on Zelensky's desk for nearly a year. Since expanding the draft is unpopular among Ukrainians, as war fatigue has been setting in. Zelensky also signed two other laws aimed at getting more troops for the failing war effort against Russia. One requires men who have been declared only partially fit for service to undergo another medical examination. Another law will establish an electronic database for military-aged men between the ages of 70 and 60 as Ukraine looks to mobilize hundreds of thousands of fresh troops. Under martial law, all men aged 18 to 60 cannot leave the country. Zelensky signed the laws a few weeks after Senator Lindsey Graham visited Ukraine and demanded change to the conscription laws. Graham said, "I would hope that those eligible to serve in the Ukrainian military would join. I can't believe it's 27. You're in a fight for your life. You should be serving not at 25 or 27. We need more people in the line." In the early days of the war, Graham said Ukraine would be willing to fight to the last person as long as the U.S. continued to provide military aid. Now that hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and it is becoming clear Ukraine has no chance of winning on the battlefield, Hots in the U.S. are still looking to fuel the proxy war against Russia and keep the Ukrainians fighting. All right, next up here, U.S., Japan, Philippines to launch joint patrols in the South China Sea. This one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The U.S., Japan, and Philippines will launch joint patrols in the South China Sea later this year in a move sure to escalate tensions with China, Politico reported on Friday. The joint patrols will be announced in April when President Biden, the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, and the Philippines President Marcos Jr. will hold their first ever trilateral summit. The U.S. has been bolstering its alliances with Tokyo and Manila as part of its preparations in the region for a future war with China, and has also been encouraging the two countries to increase their joint cooperation. Last year, the three countries held their first trilateral maritime exercise in the South China Sea. The increase in cooperation in the South China Sea comes as the Chinese and Philippines Coast Guards frequently have encounters near the disputed rots and reefs. In the most recent incident, Chinese vessels fired water cannon at a Philippine supply boat, injuring several crew members. And if you're looking or watching the show here, Dave includes this map in his articles of the South China Sea, showing the overlapping claims that all these countries have to the territory of the region. And while China certainly seemed the most ambitious, many of them seem to have quite significant barriers with each other, including U.S. allies. So it's kind of confusing as to how the U.S. seeks to resolve this. It really only seems that they're interested in it so long as it militarizes the relationship with China. All right, next up here, U.S. scraps planned visit to Mideast to normalize Saudi-Israeli ties. I wrote this one for the Institute on April 3rd. The White House indefinitely suspended a trip by a high-level delegation to the Middle East that hoped to see Saudi Arabia agree to normalize relations with Israel. While there is little chance Riyadh will strengthen ties with Tel Aviv amid the onslaught in Gaza, the White House remains committed to the policy. So, Akbar Shahid Ahmed, a senior reporter for the Huffington Post, posted on X a planned trip by Jade Sullivan, Brett McGurk, and Amos Hochstein to Saudi Arabia has been postponed indefinitely per U.S. official. The White House has pushed to incentivize Saudi Arabia to normalize its ties with Israel throughout the Joe Biden presidency. The deal will mark an expansion of the Donald Trump-era Abraham Accords, which saw 4 Muslim countries develop official relations with Tel Aviv despite its continued occupation of Palestine. In exchange for abandoning demands for improved treatment of Palestinians, Washington offered the signers weapons and other favors. While presented as a path to a more peaceful Middle East, the deals have heightened tensions with Iran and create an arms race between two of the Abraham Accord signatories, that's Israel and the UAE. After Israel responded to the October 7th Hamas attack with a brutal and indiscriminate bombing campaign in Gaza, the prospects of achieving an Israeli-Saudi deal are now almost zero. So Ahmed explains, the Biden aides wanted to push forward a U.S.-Saudi-Israeli deal. The Saudi desire for a deal has undeniably tempered since 10/7, while the U.S. remains fixated on it. He continued that the HuffPost reporter said that McGurk, who heads the Middle East policy at the State Department, remains fixated on the unworkable project. At the State Department, it is widely understood that the Saudis won't engage on this for some time. The HuffPost reporter posted on X and then added, very much a White House McGurk-led fixation on this normalization. That is the reason they're still committed to it. Many experts on Middle East policy recognize that Arab states will be unwilling to improve ties with Israel so long as Israel continues its slaughter of tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians in Gaza. However, the White House has viewed the bombing in Gaza as an opportunity to expand the deal, frequently proposing a role for Arab states in rebuilding Gaza after Israel destroys it and allow the creation of a demilitarized Palestinian rump state. It appears Israel and its Arab neighbors in the Middle East have no interest in this proposal, despite nearly all countries receiving billions of dollars in aid and weapons from the U.S. The White House has claimed the trip in the region was only canceled because Sullivan sustained a broken rib. So if that is true, I mean, how just awful of a person is Jade Sullivan that, you know, he's not going to either do it virtually or suck it up and go to try to end this war and establish some kind of peace. You know, if this really is important, you can't imagine that they would really let a little broken rib get in the way. There's also that you just send other representatives or again, do this over a Skype call or something like that. But it doesn't seem like any of that's going to happen because the real reason is the Saudis were never going to do with this. And it was an embarrassment for the Americans to even bother to go over there and try. So they just canceled the trip completely. I think, another, again, interesting part of all of this is all these countries are paid by the United States, and we can't get any of them to align on everything. And just how stupid the Biden administration's policy is, that this is what they've been fixated on. This is what they've been trying to do to resolve the problem in Gaza over the past 6-7 months now. And you see why this war is still going on at the pace it's going on. If the Biden administration is really this inept when it comes to understanding the geopolitical temperature of the region. All right, so this up next: Israel, U.S. brace for potential Iranian retaliation for Syria consulate bombing. The U.S. and Israel are bracing for potential Iranian retaliation for the Israeli bombing of an Iran consulate building in Damascus, which killed 7 members of the IRGC, including a senior Quds Force commander and another general. Israel frequently kills Iranians in Syria and conducts covert attacks inside Iran, but the attack on the Iranian consulate marked a huge escalation in the campaign against Tehran. Iran is Iran is usually very restrained in its response to Israeli attacks, but according to Al Mayadeen, Israel's Channel 13 reported that Israel is preparing for a direct Iranian attack. Israeli security sources say they believe Iran was determined to respond more than ever before. Israel's Channel 12 reported that Israel is at its highest state of alert and preparedness for the potential attack. My understanding is that Israel has removed I don't know if it's an order or just typical business, but its troops were going to go home some of its troops were going to be allowed to go home on the weekend, spend time with their families, work, I don't know. But those were canceled, and so all troops will remain in their post over the weekend. A direct Iranian attack could be exactly what Israel wants, since it appears it has been trying to provoke a major regional war in hopes that the U.S. gets involved directly. The U.S. has denied any role in the Israeli attack on the diplomat facility, but Iranian officials have said the U.S. must be held accountable for its military support for Israel. According to the AP, the U.S. provides Israel with about 70% of the weapons it imports and funds about 15% of its military budget. The Israeli attack on the embassy appeared to be carried out using U.S.-provided aircraft and munitions. By the U.S. own logic, its support for Israel is enough to blame it for the consulate bombing. The U.S. said Iran was responsible for the attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan by Iraqi Shia militants because Iran armed the groups despite the lack of any evidence of direct Iranian support, while the U.S. support for Israel is overt and everybody knows about it. All right, couple stories from Jason Ditz here on the coming potential war between Israel and Lebanon. Israel Defense Minister: war on Lebanon would be catastrophic for Lebanon. The Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, was keen to start the public preparedness campaign to ready the population for all-out war against Lebanon, but it only took one day and a visit to Haifa to start making proclamations about what a disaster it would be for Lebanon. Gallant detailed how Israel is preparing for war against both near and distant enemies, while declaring that Israel was already expanding our action against Hezbollah, clearly a reference to the many attacks on southern Lebanon in recent weeks. He further talked about striking our enemies all over the Middle East, likely a reference to the attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus and other sites in Syria, including some in Aleppo. The point of his comments was to prepare the public for war in Lebanon, saying that it would be disastrous not only for Hezbollah but for the rest of Lebanon. He did not refer to the war as being a challenge for Israel. That is noteworthy because the U.S. has warned of challenges of opening a second front, and Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah doubted such a war could be launched. Israel dismissed these concerns. Indeed, military officials hyped up Israel's preparedness for a war at any moment. And it does appear that a part of the reason Israel has not attacked Rafah yet is because it has a significant amount of its military force directed at the north, either preparing for this war with Hezbollah or just trying to be ready for it in case it breaks out. All right, next up here. As attacks escalate, Israeli defense minister looks to prepare public for Lebanon war. So this is what, this is just another article from Jason Ditz explaining that, the goal is to raise the awareness of a possible war. And that's why Gallant is making these comments. All right, last article here today. Another one from Jason Ditz. Death toll in Israeli airstrikes on Syria's Aleppo raises to 52. And so in the past week, there were 2 huge attacks Israel carried out in Syria. One killed 52 people and the other one was on the Iranian consulate. And so this is major escalations, and it really, really appears that Israel is doing what it can to provoke a wider war and to get the U.S. involved in this thing. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. Again, I will have another show out on Friday with all the updates, what's happened in the past week in Gaza. Be sure to keep an eye on the Scott Horton Show. I should be on either Thursday on KPFK or sometime over the weekend. He will post the interview at the Libertarian Institute. And I think I'll be talking about Ukraine stuff on the show. So check that out. All right, everybody, thanks.